The next panel is Hannah Miller from Media and Democracy Coalition, Jennifer Mercurio, we know Jennifer, Jean Look from the Future of Music Coalition, and Chris Keeley from Common Cause.
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Miller. I'm with the Media and Democracy Coalition. We're based in D.C. We are a coalition of over 30 nonprofit organizations, including many that are here in this room today, that work to advance public interest in media policies in a bunch of different areas. I came here today to applaud the New York City Council Committee on Technology and Government for taking leadership on such a crucial issue as net neutrality. New York City is so dominant in industries that need stringent non-discrimination regulation: TV, film, finance, international trade, web, nonprofit, and so on. And a strong statement in support of net neutrality here can serve as a beacon to other cities. Without net neutrality, fixed and mobile internet users are going to be able to access fewer sites, use fewer applications, view fewer music, video, or multimedia files, while probably seeing their rates continue to rise. If incumbents are permitted to destroy the non-discriminatory nature of the internet by favoring some content over others, they will essentially be picking winners and losers in today's online society. In a situation that brings to mind the phrase made famous by Brown versus Board of Education, separate but unequal. The Media and Democracy Coalition supports the 6 principles put forth by FCC Chair Julius Janikowski and argues for the strongest possible rules that will preserve the innovative, open nature of the internet. But we would also like to suggest that the committee may also want to demonstrate support for other policies that would spur more competition and innovation in the broadband marketplace. This summer, the Federal Communications Commission commissioned Harvard University to Berkman Center for the Internet and Society to examine which regulatory frameworks would result in the best possible outcome for next-generation broadband. They studied the broadband markets and policies of 14 different countries and came to the conclusion that it was the open access principles of these networks which allow multiple ISPs to compete over the same broadband infrastructure that contributed to the growth of affordable, ubiquitous broadband. Open access policies, and there are many, net neutrality is one of many of these, promote competition, innovation, and consumer choice by mandating that carriers share their network with other entities that want to provide services. That's not unlike the system that brought competition to local and long-distance telephone service years ago here in the United States. The nation studied in the FCC Commission report largely started with regulatory frameworks as light as our own, but over the last 10 years, they have required carriers to open their networks to competitors, not only to develop their own infrastructure, but their IT industries as well on a national level. I encourage all of you on the committee, and hopefully later the City Council, to read the Berkman Center report and become a part of the fight for open access provisions. These 14 nations had a choice between the interests of a handful of telecommunications companies or the economic well-being of society as a whole. And in all 14, it turned out to be no contest. I hope we choose as wisely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon now, Councilmember Brewer. My name is Chris Keeley. I'm Associate Director of Common Cause New York. As you know, Common Cause is a government watchdog organization dedicated to increasing public participation in the public discourse through government procedures, bringing the public into the process. And for that end, to that end, Common Cause firmly supports net neutrality, firmly supports this resolution before the committee today, the proposal before the FCC, and the legislation before Congress right now. As the chair and the members of this committee know well, the expansion of the internet in recent years has fostered the development of an entirely new dynamic of democratic participation. It's allowed for new heights of citizen involvement and access to information. It's created, in effect, a new town square. It's allowed people to come together without regulations, to share their ideas, to go back and forth, to start to collaborate independent of actual physical space. According to the FCC proposal that's currently pending, Congress has recognized that the internet offers a forum of true diversity of political discourse. This is what we're talking about. It goes right from the White House down to the local PTA. It's cultivated public debate and democratic participation. And what has allowed this, one of the reasons, one of the things that have allowed this to happen is net neutrality, is that principle of non-discrimination, that we are going to allow this discourse to take place under its own guise. And to that end, to those ends for democratic participation, that's why Common Cause sees this as a critical public infrastructure. Joshua Breitbart from People's Production House mentioned that earlier, and that is absolutely where we stand. This is a critical public infrastructure that we can talk about the information superhighway. We can talk about regulating or not regulating that as it may go forward. But even when state roads are taken over by private institutions, it's still the state that regulates it. It's still the state that manages the speed limits. And it's still the state that does not allow for a private fast lane for those who can afford it, and then a slow lane for those who cannot. That is discriminatory, and that's something that in this sort of situation with this sort of critical infrastructure, that's something that we would very vehemently oppose, and we would hope the council would too. As we're talking about the government access in this scenario, it's important to also note, as was discussed a little earlier, that there is still a very broad digital divide. Right here in New York City, around the country, we know it's elderly populations, we know it's rural populations, low-income individuals, and even beyond that. We applaud the chair's work on this front. We look forward to your continued efforts on this. One thing that I would like to highlight as it relates to this committee again is this committee's done a very impressive job of putting forward-thinking resolutions, forward-thinking laws, Local Law 11, bringing government work online so that anyone can see it, considering things like webcasting city council committee reports, council hearings, I should say, even informally doing things like Twitter today, doing things like webcasting it live. People can then pull it up later on. That this brings people into the process. And by creating tiered access, it's going to, it has the potential to create major obstacles for individuals to be able to participate directly with their local, state, and federal governments. So again, just to wrap up, we support this resolution wholeheartedly. And hope that the council, that the committee and the full council will pass it. We'll pass that through. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Good morning or good afternoon, Chair Brewer, and thank you for putting forth 712A as well as holding this hearing. ECA, the Entertainment Consumers Association, which I am here representing, is very much in support of the sentiments in 712A, as well as the FCC's moving forward in protecting network neutrality. I'm Jennifer Mercurio. I'm the Vice President and General Counsel of the Entertainment Consumers Association, which represents the over 115 million Americans who play video games in America, and over 50% of whom, so that's over 65 million Americans, who play and or download video games from online sources. We know from the work we've been doing for a very long time that the internet being open has fostered not only new industries among strictly tech companies, but it has also fostered new industries within the video game world itself. Even accessing video games collaboratively through the internet and through a net neutral environment has brought us to a completely new place with PlayStations and other consoles like Xboxes, where one can now access Facebook and other social networking sites, where one, even on the social networking sites, one can play video games. I don't want to take up too much time because it's with my testimony, because you have it in front of you. I would like to do a couple of counterpoints just to certain things that have been said earlier. One thing I would like to state is that it seems that most people, regardless of which side of the issue one is on, most people agree that what we have now is pretty darn good, and that having a network neutrality of some sort is a good thing. Even the industry folks have been arguing that it fosters innovation. Once again, through the video gaming world, we can point to countless sources of innovation that have come about and new things that are emerging literally every day. This week, there are certain things that came out about Xboxes and PlayStations that are dependent upon accessing and playing on the internet and having net neutrality in place. So it seems as though, even though everyone's in agreement that a net neutral world is fabulous, that for some people it's frightening that the FCC might promulgate rules to go along with a net neutral environment. However, the reason that we are now all here before you, the reason that you have drafted and are putting forth 712A, the reason that the FCC and President Obama are so very into having net neutrality rules promulgated is because we are seeing, not in isolated instances, but a general shift by the ISPs to charge people more and more money, either through capping or through tiering, for things that people have been able to access universally in the past. So I'll stop there. I would like to counterpoint some of the other issues that have been raised, but we are very supportive of 712A, and thank you very much for drafting it.
Thank you. Next.
Members of the committee and fellow speakers, it's a privilege to appear here today to talk about net neutrality, which is an issue that has enormous bearing on those in the creative community. My name is Jean Cook. I'm a musician. For half my life, I've been making music in New York, making recordings and performing, and was living in Letitia James's district until just a couple of years ago when I moved to Washington, D.C. to become interim executive director of Future of Music Coalition. FMC is a national nonprofit education, research, and advocacy organization for musicians and composers. FMC works to ensure that artists are able to develop audiences through essential platforms like radio and the internet. We also care deeply about developing appropriate compensation structures for artists as we continue this rocky transition to a largely digital environment for music. When the original Napster appeared nearly a decade ago, the traditional music industry was confronted with a troublesome new reality. Reproduction and distribution was no longer something exclusive to the big labels and their industry partners. It was now in the hands of the masses. Clearly, this had major implications for copyright and intellectual property. But as FMC said at the time, and still believe, the only viable alternative to an illegal Napster is a legal one. Since then, we've advocated for a legitimate and robust digital music marketplace that fairly compensates artists and allows for innovative ways for discovering music. In the remainder of the decade, we've seen remarkable examples of using the open internet to connect with audiences and advance their careers on their own terms. Musicians are collaborating, selling merchandise, booking tours, and building fan bases via the web. The band OK Go's homemade YouTube video became an international sensation and led to the band winning a Grammy Award for Best Short Video. Singer-songwriter Erin McKeown, she holds virtual concerts around her house that her fans can watch live online from all over the world. And even though Alex Shapiro, a composer, lives in a remote island off the coast of Washington State, she's still able to make a living off of commissions from, among other places, her MySpace page. Meanwhile, there are countless legal services such as Rhapsody, Pandora, iTunes, eMusic, Mog, and Lala, to name a few, that make it incredibly easy for listeners to seek out music. And for me, as a classically trained musician and somebody who comes from the jazz community, there are incredibly useful niche music discovery sites, such as Calabash or Archive Music, which make it possible to delve deep into catalogs of music from around the world and classical music. These services are now on the same playing field as most of the mainstream services. These successes are models for a new industry, and they would not have been possible without open internet structures. Net neutrality gives essentially everyone a license to innovate, and we see the results from the artists whose creativity is fueling the Music 2.0, as well as the technologists who are designing amazing new ways to experience music. In the emerging digital marketplace, there are far fewer middlemen or gatekeepers that are holding artists back or imposing conditions on them in exchange for access to listeners. As the digital music marketplace matures, we're keenly aware of the dangers facing the independent and niche music communities if new gatekeepers, such as the telecommunications companies, were to be given control over what you can experience on the internet. Although artists have thus far had the benefit of open internet structures that gives them access to the same essential technologies as the best funded companies, there have been troubling instances where telecommunications companies have behaved in a manner that raises serious concerns for artists' ability to not only reach potential audiences, but also enjoy their right to expression. One example of the latter came in 2007 when the band Pearl Jam performed at Lollapalooza. AT&T had the exclusive right to the online broadcast of that concert, and during an improvised segment, singer Eddie Vedder made statements critical about the then President George W. Bush. AT&T censored this portion of the broadcast, leaving viewers at home wondering what he was saying. Although this isn't necessarily a perfect example of non-net neutrality, it does illustrate what can happen when one ISP has sole control over the distribution of content and is allowed to make its own calls about what is or isn't acceptable speech. With the new FCC commissioners in place, it finally appears that expanded net neutrality principles will become part of the rules of the road for the internet. The transparent process the Commission launched with its October 22nd Notice of Proposed Rulemaking rightfully recognizes that there are a great number of stakeholders, including creators and the public, whose voices must be considered as the FCC goes about crafting net neutrality policies. It's important to remember that these proposed rules apply only to lawful content, sites and services, which leaves room for discussion about ways to prevent the unlawful sharing of content. This is an important distinction. Ensuring compensation for rights holders is hardly incompatible with net neutrality. There are currently conversations about possible technological solutions to the illegal transfer of copyrighted content, but such discussions need not compromise the goal of establishing clear and transparent rules for net neutrality. In fact, net neutrality is critical to continue to nurture and support innovation and legal licensed services as an alternative to piracy. In our quest to ensure proper compensation for creators and rights holders, we must be careful not to compromise what makes the Internet such an incredible platform for innovation, expression, and entrepreneurship. On behalf of FMC, I'm pleased that the committee is giving this matter the attention it deserves, as the FCC undertakes a thorough and open process that will hopefully ensure that the Internet remains an unprecedented space for creativity, commerce, and the exchange of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Jen, I have a question because I know that the video game industry is now huge. How do you combat piracy, if at all? Is that something that is a problem, or is that not an issue in your industry?
Piracy.
Need to use the, or illegal, illegal downloading or whatever people find to do.
Intellectual property piracy is an issue across all content industries. Within the video game industry, the video game world, the industry association, the Entertainment Software Association, ESA, has a quite robust anti-piracy unit that will go after pirate rings, whether in the U.S. or around the globe, as does the MPAA for movies and the RIA for music. The Entertainment Consumers Association that I work with, its purpose is to empower consumers, and empowering consumers to understand what is and what is not piracy, which no one has really, quite honestly, done. So we recently launched a Gamers for Digital Rights to begin teaching the public more about what piracy is and is not. What is IP? What is intellectual property? What do you own? Even with a video game, if you're downloading a video game, do you own that video game, or do you own some bits of that video game, or is it solely a license? Because historically different things have existed at different times regarding one's rights. So, to circle back to your question, it's an issue. It's an issue across the media spectrum, and it's an issue that anyone dealing within any content industry, any organization or company must.
Well, it seems to me that what you're saying is that the codifying of net neutrality isn't one way or the other. The real issue is that you have to have all these other opportunities in place in order to be able to curtail any theft of intellectual property. In other words, there's just many other layers that you need to keep the pirates away.
Correct. And just to respond to that particular point in two ways. One of which is what we have found is that as people get more access, as things are better known, as the public knows more what their rights are and how to properly use them, they are more willing and able to act in an appropriate manner, not realizing in most instances when something is just, they're unintentionally doing something. When they realize that there must be an intent to move in a bad way, a bad direction, they generally move away from that. The other way that I would respond to that is that the FCC itself, in promulgating certain rules, but then also in responding to issues that certain corporations have had in the proposal of the 2 additional rules, is that the FCC staff, and I'm sure most people here know this, the FCC staff has put out some guidelines and developed guidelines regarding reasonable network management, which is kind of the loophole that one can use to scoot around these rules or work within this framework to protect the ISPs or corporate interests more. And some of those rules are exactly to block unlawful content, which would be childhood porn and piracy. Yeah, exactly. So they're there. These rules are there to assist in these kinds of things. And my presumption is that under the network neutrality universe, there are ways that corporate interests can move forward to protect intellectual property owners, other rights owners, and other, lawful uses as opposed to the unlawful uses.
Ms. Cook, thank you very much for your testimony. Some of the songwriters had a different perspective. Were you here when they were speaking? Do you guys talk to each other?
Yes.
Okay. So there's some opportunity then to figure out how we could work on a resolution that took into account their concerns and certainly what you had to offer. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. And then the other issue I have for the panel is, do you think that the codifying of net neutrality will help us as far as we can to erase this digital divide, which is something that bothers me tremendously? Have you had any thoughts about that? Maybe others?
Yeah, I do think that there's a relationship. I think the net neutrality fight is made out to be much more technical and confusing than it actually is, because it's, in the end, this is really about consumer choice and the affordability of the of information, pretty much. So as there's 2 issues there. One is the affordability of access. As access becomes more expensive, you see less people going online, of course, so that's always the reason. But the other thing is, once you get online, what kind of information people will have access to, if we don't enact these rules, are going to be entirely determined by how much you can pay. And, we have discrimination in every single segment of our society, in housing and healthcare and employment. Unless we enact these rules, we'll just see a replication of that inequality on the internet, and that is something that it's the most democratizing influence we've ever had as one of them as a society, and to throw it away like that would be terrible. But I encourage the other panelists to address that. You guys want to?
On a related note, just talking about the broader discrimination, I was mentioning to somebody in the back of the chamber earlier that listening to some of the conversations that were going on in some of the earlier panels, it struck me, it gave me almost cold sweats thinking back. Before I joined Common Cause, I was with an organization, we worked around subprime mortgage lending issues. For 5 years I was working on that, and the testimony on those days in 2002, 2003, 2004, they sounded an awful lot like this. And it boils down to 2 words: trust us. And I think that there is a place for reasonable government regulation, and I think that codifying net neutrality principles is one of those reasonable government roles, that is a role they should be taking. That said, I think there could be some clarification of the reasonable network management definitions, but trust us just doesn't cut it.
Okay. Jen?
I also just wanted to add that, to a certain degree, universal broadband, which is more of the access and the infrastructure aspect of the discussion that we've all been having, is separable from network neutrality, in that the laying of the broadband so that people in rural communities or disadvantaged communities can get the computers and then get onto the internet, that's one issue, at least in my mind. And then the network neutrality issue that we're all talking about mostly today is more about, as other panelists have said, keeping it all free, open, and equal, which is what we all like right now, and keeping the costs on a level playing field so that if someone in a rural community, let's say, don't know of one in Manhattan per se, but someplace else, someone in a rural community is trying to get a job because unemployment is at 25-year high. They're trying to get a job that they won't be kicked off because they haven't paid enough money to their ISP and they can't get adequate access. So I just wanted to reiterate the separation between the broadband, which the federal government is also paying the ISPs to lay to a certain degree. They are underwriting studies to be done about how to do it. So the ISPs are very happy for government assistance in that way, and yet seem troubled by keeping the actual internet free and open for all Americans.
I would like to add on to the whole idea of trust us as well. When you go back to the example from my testimony about what happened with Pearl Jam, the only reason why we figured out what had happened was because they had a number of fans who were at the show. And they also made their own recordings and put the bump on YouTube. And then people noticed, people who were watching the broadcast just kind of figured, well, maybe my connection's just not very good right now. It was only when people were able to compare side by side the official broadcast and the broadcasts by the fans that they realized very kind of strategically the words that were blocked were the ones that were critical of the administration. When AT&T was asked about it, they denied that they had done anything. When they were pressed further on it and there was more pressure put on them, then they said that it was an error that was made by an overzealous editor. Now, if this is what they're talking about when they say that, we'll just kind of figure these things out on a case-by-case basis, what really concerns me as an artist is that it's very difficult to tell when these things are happening. It wasn't until the Pearl Jam case came out that other artists looked at their own broadcasts from other festivals and realized that it also happened to them. This is the kind of burden that I'm not sure that we really want to place on the creative community or on the public.
I want to thank this panel very much, and we look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.